we are always going to end up in the same thinking process of, well, why has this person got an injury in the first place? Because the reality is not everyone gets an injury, and there are reasons and factors associated why people do develop problems and why people don't. And this is where this complex thinking helps you to understand, well, what are the factors going on? And more importantly, what are the main factors? Because I think the issue that we can also have is, well, one, we become too procedural of treating someone based on their problem, i.e. their injury, as opposed to understanding... well,
potentially more about them.
Exactly, yes.
And I think you highlight a really important point. If you look at, say, something like hamstring injuries, the reason that we haven't seen the changes that we would have liked from the work that's been done, say, by the hamstring injury group here in Australia, where they have shown that actually, we can reduce injury risk by the application of eccentric loading, and that if you get to a certain level, you do seem to have some level of protection. Now, to me, if that was the only cause, then we would have seen a huge drop-off. And they talk about this issue of compliance, people don't do it. But there's clearly still a gap. And the reason that there's a gap is there's lots of reasons why someone may strain a hamstring. Absolutely. And that's the complex nature of the injury development. And what you tend to find is sometimes the ones that, or some of the injuries that people think, well, I don't understand why that happened. They had strength, their running technique's reasonably good. We do expose them to, say, high-speed running, all of those things. Why did they develop a hamstring injury? And often it's got to relate to some of those other factors and the dynamic nature of those factors. Yes. So something like part of the general health scheme or their ability to deal with stress in real time. If someone hasn't slept for 3 or 4 nights because of whatever reason, maybe they're stressed out, maybe they broke up with their partner or whatever it is, and then you expose them to a stressor that maybe is the same stressor they've had in the past. We know that things like sleep or even stuff like exam stress will actually reduce their reserve to be able to deal with those stresses. And I think I've spoken about it before, the work of Brian Mann, who showed the injury rates went up in a Division 1 college football team during heavy academic periods.
Yes, yeah. And look, what all this highlights too is, we all find ourselves in situations where you're treating someone following an injury and you go, and they're not getting the outcome you want.
Yeah.
And, there are times I know in my career where you go like, what the hell's going on? It almost feels chaotic in the sense that you're like, this doesn't make any sense. The reality is there's always an ability to make sense of the situation. It's just a matter of whether you've identified all the key modulators associated with the problem.
Yeah.
And this is where I think sometimes you see the problem where someone will go, this is too complicated, I need maybe an expert opinion. And look, there are obviously situations where that may be the case, particularly if there's, say, been a misdiagnosis. But more often than not, it's because you haven't identified one of the key modulators associated with this issue. And again, that may not always be physical.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that. To give people a bit of an example, I had someone come in during the week who has been having ongoing, medial tibial stress syndrome, so shin splints, and at times it's shifted into stress reactions. They've had to come in and out of a boot and all of these kind of things. And they were actually referred by someone that is in the sports performance realm that I know, and they said, look, we've identified a lot of these physical things, we feel like we've addressed a lot of them, but I'm still having these problems. They can't get their running going, they want to do some more long distance running. So I said, okay, sent them in, and straight away it was really obvious when I started asking questions around things like nutrition that this individual wasn't eating enough of the food, wasn't eating enough of the right food, had a history of not getting enough nutrients.
Yes.
And straight away that starts setting alarm bells off in my head about bone health.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So one of the first things that I did was, speak to this individual about, okay, do you have a dietitian that you've worked with? And actually got in contact with the dietitian, said, like, I need you to do some review with this person. We need to be making sure that we're getting, one, adequate energy, but they need to be trying to maximize bone health. So whether that's, utilization of vitamin D, calcium, other dairy products, and maximizing, collagen intake, maximizing protein intake, all of these things that are going to be good for lean muscle mass, for the development of bone tissue, and for maintaining their ability, one, from an energy standpoint, particularly carbohydrates, for being able to actually maintain the amount of physical activity that this individual wants to do.
Sure.